Alright, we've got the timing belt in, and we're going to talk about how to just put everything back together. It's essentially in reverse order, but you just got to remember to do a couple of things. First thing is the mounting bracket that attaches to the engine. It's this bracket right here that goes down. Put that on. It's the 3 bolts on there, and then you should be able to put the rest of the engine mount in. And you can raise and lower using your jack. You can raise and lower the car, which will adjust the height of the engine to get it in. So the first thing you do is you put the engine block back in. The engine mount back in. Put the bolt in, and that there's no pressure on this when you do that. You put it in, and you'll see there's 2 studs that stick out, and they'll just slide right into the bottom bracket. And don't worry about doing the nuts just yet. And then remember to before you put one of the nuts back on to this pump cover, it actually slides through a hole. It actually slides through a hole in this bracket down here. So make sure that this bracket is in place, and then there's a 12mm bolt that slides down and through, and then once you get that on, then you'll be all set. And you can put these bolts back in here. So once you get this mount back in, and you get all the bolts to this side bracket that's into the engine, you'll see there's 2 studs that are sticking out at the bottom of this engine mount here. There's 2 brackets there. So what you can do is, if the nuts aren't reaching it, you can just raise and lower your jack on the car, and that'll raise or lower the engine. And when you raise or lower the engine, you'll see those studs come down lower. And then you put the nuts on it. I used an impact wrench, a little easier. There's hardly anything you can use an impact wrench on in this car, but that's one of the bolts. And just put the 2 bolts on, put it in, and then you can then you don't need the blocks underneath the oil pan. And then you just do everything in reverse order, putting before you do anything with the alternator wires, disconnect the negative battery cable. So put the alternator bracket back on. There's 2 studs that stick out from the engine. Slide it on there first. Put the nuts on there. Those are like guide pins. So put it on there, and then once you get those 2 nuts on, then there's a bolt on the side and 2 bolts underneath. And then the alternator bracket, you've got 1 long bolt that goes to that bracket, and then you got the another side bolt that you tighten, and then the bolt on the left side is what you use to adjust your tension on your belt. So remember to put the alternator belt on first, and once you put the alternator belt on, adjust the tension I use an air socket wrench, because you got a long ways to go with that nut. It would take you 1,000 turns if you just use a regular socket. And then make sure it's not too tight. You want to move it up and down about 3/8, ½ inch. And then after you do that, you can do the same thing with the air conditioner belt. You have to put the pulley back on. Make sure that spacer is behind. You had everything wired together before. There's a spacer that goes behind the idler wheel. So this nut is connected to a washer. So put the washer. This nut is a nut and washer, and it goes onto a stud that sticks out from back here. So you just put it on, leave it loose for a bit, and then clockwise. Just use your air gun and just go down and make sure the belt is not too tight. Once you got it adjusted, tighten this nice and tight right here, and that'll be your adjustment for your belt. And then you can put these other brackets back on. There's another bracket right here. That should all go on here. This bolt here. Remember, there's a spacer right here. You should be making a list of all the stuff as you take it apart. A list in the diagram. There's a spacer right here when you put this on. And then the next step is to put this hose back on. And there's a screw right here. Make sure, don't forget this ground. There's a ground wire right here. I'm not sure what it goes to. But connect that back on. And then on this one, you have to put the bolt down here, 9mm bolt. This is your cruise control set. Put the 10mm bolt in first there. You can bend the whole thing forward, and then you can just put this one in, but don't tighten that one yet. And then once you get this tightened, I'm sorry, don't tighten that one yet. Tighten that one all the way, the one behind it. Tighten that one all the way down. Put this one in loose, and then make sure you get that one in. And it's all going to be done with a 10mm. It's only 3 bolts. And then tighten them all down. And don't forget to put water back into your engine, antifreeze, and make sure you get all the air purged out of it. And then you should be good to go. Fire it up.